Hey guys, how are you? I've been trying to get on Facebook to do Facebook Live videos for you guys to help you ascend to the mind, and unfortunately, I'm being blocked heavily from doing Facebook Lives at this point. And I think we all comprehend and understand why. So today, what we're going to go over is maxims and the importance of maxims and the difference between Roman civil equity maxims, which are equitable by characteristic, versus the exclusive jurisdiction of English equity maxims that are self-evident and need no proving, okay? And it's important to understand the difference. When I was first handed a Plubert's book, I started going through the Plubert's dictionary. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I could be wrong. And typically, the older the law, the better the law, okay? The more true it is. And the reason for that is our ancestors went through some trials and tribulations that were very brutal, guys. So when we're talking about, for example, in the United States of America, we have this thing called the Constitution. Now, there are multiple constitutions, and many people either are aware of that or not aware of that, but just to help you ascend of the mind, I want to talk about the preamble in particular to the Constitution to help you understand where your standing comes from, okay? Because it was the intent of the testators, all right? And that's huge. When we start studying trust, we understand that trust law is the highest law in the land. And people, many of legal scholars have argued with me over this fact. And what I find interesting about it is I ask them, one of the first things I ask them when they want to debate that trust law is the highest law in the land. And I said, would you take your offspring to a child care facility if you didn't trust them? Well, of course not. And I said, so trust is the highest law in the land. Because if you don't trust somebody, you ain't doing business with them, right? If you don't trust somebody, you're not dropping off your most precious cargo, right? So trust is the highest law, and that's where we need to start. And the trust has most definitely been breached, ladies and gentlemen, by the corrupt actors. And I got to be very careful about what I say so I don't get blocked from here, all right? They're already flagging me and screening my videos. So today, we're going to talk about maxims. Maxims, again, are self-proving. So for you guys that are going into courts unprepared, you didn't do preventative maintenance, which that's why I do what I do, is to help you ascend of the mind and to engage in preventative maintenance. In case a rogue agent and agency takes interest in you, you have to know how to fend for yourself and comprehend what's going on. And I was in a court with a gal who used nothing but maxims and won her case. Nothing but maxims. And as soon as I start getting into these maxims, you will start to see why that is. All right, so we're going to start out with this one. Equity acts upon the person, forcing him or her to do what conscience requires. That's God conscience or good conscience, right? And if equity acts upon the person, forcing him or her to do what conscience requires, then equity will not suffer a wrong without a remedy. Okay, now, a wrong is a trespass, okay? And everything in our life that affects us by another is a trespass. And everything can be attributed to theft, okay? Theft is unlawful. Stealing is illegal. Theft is unlawful as well as illegal. And you have to understand the difference in the words and the way that they're used, okay? And we always want to stay on the lawful side because that's where our remedies are had, okay? They're not had on the legal side. Are there remedies on the legal side? Yes. The chances of you actually getting through their legal court system unscathed, next to nil. And I know this with firsthand knowledge, all right? So when a wrong occurs, a wrong is a trespass, and we need to be able to identify it as such, okay? And the trespass, if you don't know how to identify it, let's say it was trespass by way of theft, by way of extortion, okay? Theft and extortion, or it could be theft by way of murder. Okay, theft by way of murder. What was the theft that was involved with a murder? They took my precious loved one from me. I no longer get to see them every day. I'm a man aggrieved by their inept, incompetent actions that caused me to lose my loved one. All right, and that's theft. Okay, so everything can be attributed to a theft or a trespass by way of theft. I really don't care what it is. If you don't know how else to put it in play, that right there is your saving grace. Now, your avenues into getting into equity. The equity is where a man finds remedy. A woman, a man finds remedy. And the best way to revenue, okay, which is revenue, the best way to revenue the venue that you're in is to make it a property issue, okay? Rights are property and property are rights, but in order to ensure that you get into the exclusive jurisdiction of equity, make it a property issue. A conflict of variances between the rules of equity and the rules of law, where the rules of equity always prevail. All right? And again, this is for preventative maintenance. If you're in a court already, it's really hard to shift gears. These guys are highly trained to manipulate the situation, and they get kickbacks for it. There is no non-biased judge in the United States of America. They don't fucking exist. All right? And I'm going to try and help you guys through maxims, comprehend how you can adequately and efficiently move through court, all right? And if equity will not suffer a wrong without a remedy, then equity imputes an intention to fulfill an obligation. And if equity imputes an intention to fulfill an obligation, then equity acts specifically and not by way of compensation. And if equity acts specifically and not by way of compensation, then equity regards that as done which ought to be done. And if equity regards that as done which ought to be done, then equity requires him who seeks equity to do equity, right? We must have a pure conscience, a pure heart, clean slate. We must go in there loving, all right? You walk in there like Gandhi, okay? And you ask questions. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Put the onus of probandi back on them. I can't stress it any more than I'm stressing it right now. Okay? Always ask questions. The second you make a statement, you have screwed yourself. I make statements all the time. Don't be like Derek. Derek can fight his way out of almost anything at this point. Don't be like me. Ask questions. I make statements just to be a George Carlin smartass, okay? Don't make the mistake of making statements, because you may not be able to dig your way back out of there. You hear me so often in my videos make statements, and I'm trying to help you out with preventative maintenance. Don't make statements. Ask questions. And if you are going to make a statement, use maxims. They're self-evident and self-proving, okay? And if equity acts specifically and not by way of compensation, then equity regards that as done which ought to be done. These are all maxims, ladies and gentlemen. They're just put together in a nice paragraph. And if equity regards that as done which ought to be done, then equity requires him who seeks equity to do equity. That's the clean hands doctrine, ladies and gentlemen. And if equity requires him to seek equity, if equity requires him who seeks equity to do equity, then equity regards the beneficiary as the owner. Now, there's a lot of dispute about, oh, you don't want to be the beneficiary. It comes with tax liability. Excuse me. The beneficiary on the private side has no tax encumbrance or tax liability, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? So this whole theory that being the beneficiary is a bad thing, it couldn't be further from the truth. All right? In the exclusive jurisdiction of equity, the beneficiary doesn't pay anything. Okay? Now, when we're looking at the commercial side of things, the entitlement holder, if you're doing a statutory trust versus an exclusive private trust, then yes, there's some different things in a statutory trust where the beneficiary does hold liability. Okay? But we're not talking about a statutory trust, are we? We're talking about a trust on the private side, which is why all your elites don't pay taxes. Okay? Because there is no money to pay taxes on. All right. The other thing I'd like to get into that, we'll hit it here in a minute, as long as Facebook lets me keep going. Okay. So, and if equity regards that as done which ought to be done, all right, then equity requires him who seeks equity to do equity. And if equity requires him who seeks equity to do equity, then equity regards the beneficiary as the real owner. And if equity regards the beneficiary as the real owner, then equity delights to do complete justice and not by way of halves, okay? And if equity delights to do complete justice and not by way of halves, then equity acts for those disabled to act for themselves. Equity acts for those disabled to act for themselves, okay? Legally speaking, equity will come in and help the legally disabled, okay? But you have to change the venue. You're not in there being an enemy belligerent combatant. You're not a U.S. citizen. If you think you're a U.S. citizen, that's fine. Be a U.S. citizen. I hold no ill will or animosity to anybody who wants to graciously donate to the public trust for which the American people are entitled to. The national debt belongs to we, the American people, period. Everybody always wonders, who are we paying our taxes to? Where's it going? Is it going to the Queen of England? Is it going overseas? No, it's going into a public trust that's being underwritten with bonds and securities by underwriters, and they're cashing in on it as trustees, okay? Because they can't actually touch the trust. They can't actually remove assets from that trust, but what they can do is get paid from the trust as trustees. And it's perfectly fine, okay? But we have to figure out who we are and how to lay claim to our estate, because we're an heir of that estate. And if equity regards the beneficiary as the real owner, then equity delights to do complete justice and not by way of halves. And if equity delights to do complete justice and not by way of halves, then the equity acts for those disabled to act for themselves. And if equity acts for those disabled to act for themselves, then equity looks to the intent rather than the form. All right, so I don't know how many of you guys have actually been to a court and went to submit a document, whether it be a subpoena ducis tecum or a motion or a memorandum of law or a demur or an objection. I've had clerks of the court go, hey, that's not in proper form. We're not going to accept it. Hey, if you don't want to do business with me, so be it. I was here. I'll make note of this. I've got a couple witnesses here saying you're refusing my documents. Obviously, we have no issues, and there is no need for court because you're not going to accept my paperwork. The paperwork, equity looks at the intent rather than the form. So that equity doesn't care whether or not it's got a header, although I would, put a header up there. Let people know what you're trying to communicate about. But equity doesn't require that. It's the intent. So you could literally put it in your paragraph what your intent is and what you're trying to accomplish, and equity sees that the form is completely disregarded because it's the intent and the substance within the document, okay? And if equity looks to the intent rather than the form, then equity delights in equality. Equality as far as making sure everybody clean across the board is treated the same. Don't give a shit if you're red, pink, blue, green, yellow. Makes no difference to me. Makes no difference to equity. That's what's so beautiful about equity, and that's why the public side is so envious of equity, because equity can fill all voids. It's a time traveler, ladies and gentlemen, and these maxims help you change that venue, that revenue, that revenue is really what it is. When they're revenuing you, they're revenuing you, okay? It's all about securities, bonds, stocks, signatures. They're banking. They're administering a bankruptcy, okay? And they're presuming and assuming that you're a U.S. citizen, which means you're a subject slave to them. And by default, they're required, unless you state otherwise, to move forward as though you are their serf, their subject slave, okay? And I know it doesn't seem right, but if you don't know your rights, you don't have your rights, okay? And if equity delights in equality, then equity requires diligence, clean hands, and good faith, with good conscience and for good reason. Now, I stress this because where you actually get the teeth for your document is done in good faith, with good conscience, and for good reason. Those three that I just mentioned there are the teeth. They're the uppercut of your document. That right there is so powerful that even the military recognizes it in Title 50, 4305 B2, where it clearly says that anything that is done in good faith cannot possibly be a jailable offense. Okay? Because intent must be stated by the man or woman. It can never be presumed or assumed, which they do that all the time. They presume and assume you to be a criminal. They presume and assume you to be a heathen. They presume and assume you to be lawless. You know, anarchy is not about not government, no government. Anarchy is not anti-government at all. In fact, anarchy is quite the opposite. Anarchy is about self-governance. So when people go in there and say, laws don't apply to me, there are no laws, everything's lawless, yada, 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 the public official has a duty to protect the people in the land of milk and honey from harming themselves. Because if they don't believe that there's any law at all, and they don't believe in self-governing, well, then somebody will have to administrate them. That was a tough one for me to learn, okay? And I'm talking from first-hand knowledge and experience. So, anarchy, again, is not what mainstream media would have you believe. It's not what people would, that in your local community, believe that it truly is. Anarchy means to self-govern. And government means the mind control, mente, and govern. So it's control the mind. It's mind control. That's what government actually means. The word, when you look up the etymology of it, means mind control. Don't you think you should be in control of your own mind? Far be it from me to tell you how to live your life, but if you're not going to govern yourself, somebody else is going to go in there and lord over you because, well, they have a duty to keep the heathens from losing control and to make sure that everybody else that's a peaceful inhabitant isn't bothered by your heathenish ass, okay? Now, a maximum needs no proof as it is self-evident. There are some maxims that I have mentioned tonight. There are more that I'm going to be mentioning that have stood the test of time for over 10,000 years, and try as people might to overturn these maxims, you just cannot do it, all right? Because they're based on sound principle and sound doctrine. We're finding them in our King James 1611 Bibles, okay? A lot of the maxims that are used in law, not at law, come right out of this good book, ladies and gentlemen. This book is so powerful. It's so powerful. I've got, somebody's asking for results. I've won over 14 cases now. I'm not a lawyer. Never went to law school a day in my life, but the law is written on my heart. And the law that's written wasn't written for a righteous man. That doesn't mean I'm free from sin, JW. All I'm trying to tell you is that the law wasn't written for a righteous man. Okay, the law of the Pharisees, which is in here, 1 Timothy section 9, it tells you clearly who the law was written for. The heathens, the whoremongers, the war machine. Okay, that's who this was written for. Okay? And spiritually, there's a difference between spirituality and religion. Okay? Religion is something the government practices. Religion is we get a bunch of people together to decide what edicts we're gonna follow, and we create multiple jurisdictions to create mass confusion, and then we're just gonna lord over everybody their entire life because we feel they're not competent. When the truth is, they took civics out of our school system. If you truly understood what the Constitution is, the preamble is the evidence of the intent of the testator, which was to protect the posterity of the people, your liberty, your freedom, your rights. That's not what we have today, ladies and gentlemen. Freedom isn't free. You got to fight for it. So again, we'll get back into these maxims. Equity has its own jurisprudence, okay, and that's the difference between the at-law side and the exclusive jurisdiction of equity. So many people beg for common law, and I'm here to tell you right now, common law is not what you think it is, especially after 1935 when the banksters came in and said, hey, judges, gonna need you guys to pull it all in here. Now think about this. There's only 3,100 counties in the United States, 3,100 plus, okay? It isn't very much, 3,100 counties. Now, in Nebraska, there's a handful of judges per state, right? So when you're looking at this, all these judges meet in places like Vegas, other lavish areas where they meet up once a quarter, maybe twice a year, and they discuss people like me, all right? Because I'm teaching you guys their dirty little secrets that they're using to trip you up so you can prevail in the interest of justice. Now, one of my intelligent, articulate friends told me the other day, I was talking about how I'd won 14 cases. He goes, Derek, you didn't win shit. And I was thinking about what he was saying, and it dawned on me what he was talking about. It's not about winning, ladies and gentlemen. It was justice being served, and we should all celebrate that. 14 cases where justice prevailed. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about winning at all. So it helped change my mindset about what I'm doing, because I'm competitive, and at the same time, the way that I'm articulating it is a desecration of what really happened. Because what happened was the good Lord saw to it that justice prevailed. All right? And so we're all looking for justice, and justice delights in equality. All right? Justice sees that what should be done shall be done. No more of this hanky-panky, we presume and assume you to be a U.S. citizen. We presume and assume there's a contract out there somewhere. That's where the 12 presumptions of law are so powerful. But I want to get back into maxims, because these maxims really will help you out if you comprehend them and understand them. And like I said, I've been to a court case with a woman who used nothing but maxims, and she cleaned the clock of not only the prosecutor, but the judge tried to come against her, which was facetiously foolish of him. We know darn good and well he was learned enough to know what she was using, which was sound principles and doctrines, and you just aren't overcoming sound principles and doctrines. But what he was trying to do was get her to leave her square. He was trying to lead her off her path. As soon as they can get you off the yellow brick road and out into the woods, they can club you to death and put you in a cage, all right? So you must stand with conviction, okay? Know that you're not alone, and that these maxims have been there for, some of them, for thousands of years. All right, equity has its own jurisprudence. Come into the light with clean hands, a pure soul, a good intent, and a good spirit, all right? When we walk in there so often, you know, for me anyway, it was the Eye of the Tiger music playing in my head. I was going to go in there and slay me some demons. I changed my attitude a lot, and it helped me prevail. Okay, I started to go in there with more compassion, understanding. Of course, the courtroom's empty anyway, but it wasn't so much a theatrical show as it was a spiritual enlightenment, all right? Exclusive equity destroys the at-law side. Not some of the time, not part of the time, every time. And again, that's why they're so envious of you, because you can walk on both sides of that aisle. You can dally in the public if you wish, and you can also operate exclusively in the public, but they can never mix, ever. So you really have to know what you're doing if you're going to dabble in both. I've gotten efficient enough now that I don't have any problem being on either side of that aisle. I'll do a conditional acceptance in a heartbeat, or I'll turn around and slay them for not having their delegation of authority to operate outside of Washington, D.C., their bonds, their anti-bribery statements, their Foreign Registration Act. I mean, it doesn't really matter which side they want to play ball on, but unfortunately I don't get those opportunities anymore, because they know I'm not a heathen. They know that I'm not out there trying to cause anybody harm, injury, damage, or loss, and they know for a damn fact that if or should something arise by accident, that I'm going to do my best to provide remedy to eliminate the need for them, because they feed off controversy. All right? For you guys in the middle of a divorce, I would strongly suggest you go talk to a guy who's not a lawyer, who would be non-biased and be an arbitrator for you, okay? And a good arbitrator would sit down and go, okay, here's the deal. With the offspring, it's a 50-50 deal. You guys made them together. You're going to have to learn how to live close to one another, whatever the case may be, and make it work. And you're going to save tens of thousands of dollars by going to a private arbitrator, because Article 1, Section 10 doesn't grant you the right, but it protects your right to contract at will without unjust, egregious actions from the government interfering in your business, okay? And marriage is a freaking business. It's a contract, so don't get it twisted. But you can cut them out if you don't hire a lawyer. First thing lawyers do, no bullshit, especially in estate probate or divorces, first thing they do is run a credit check on your ass. They want to know how much dinero you can pull. And then, and I don't know how many of you have ever witnessed this or been through it, but I'm telling you right now, I see it all the time. They're little crooks. They're rats in the woodpile. What ends up happening is they fleece your estate until there's maybe just enough to pay the taxes. You know, they don't want to leave you completely destitute, because they want you to feel like they actually did something for you. And then what they'll do is, on the last day when they realize you only got like 6% of your estate left, they'll come to an agreement. And they'll go, hey, both us lawyers have decided, we have figured it out for you guys. You don't have a pot to piss in anymore? Thanks for letting us service you, all right? But, and there'll be just enough in the estate to pay the taxes, which means you'll have to sell the house to pay us. But, after we ran your credit and everything, after 10 months, 10 years, 2 years, whatever, we have finally figured it out. You know that when a lawyer approaches you and says, we got the answer, we figured it out, we're going to move forward, this is done, it'll be finished today, they've efficiently broken you. They've taken everything they could have possibly fleeced from your estate, and they now own it. That's the only time these lawyers find remedy real quick, is when they're done fleecing your estate, okay? When there's nothing left. When you don't have any more access to credit anymore, where you can't get $10,000 loan to hold a $10,000 retainer, and they know that if they work for you anymore, they're not going to get paid, and they're really not working for you, all right? You're supposed to find a man who's learned in law to help you. So if you're going through a divorce, you're going through something of that nature, go find a non-biased third party that you and your significant other can agree to that's fair, and then sit down and write up what you guys want. Because once that's ironed out, all you have to do is walk into the court and get them to rubber stamp it. Here you go. This is what we agreed on. Judge has no say in it at all. All she gets to do is rubber stamp the son of a bitch and go file it on the record. That's it. That's it. So instead of spending your life savings and your life's earnings and them taking these lawyers, taking your kids' college funds and everything else that they're liquidating and all your assets, maybe now you can still be civil with one another because you've come to an accord, you've come to a contract agreement, and it's binding, and it's been rubber stamped off on, right? Pay Derek Gonzalez to be an arbitrator. It's possible. Look, I'm not talking about anything that we can't accomplish and do. So, but the important part is to realize that these lawyers are not there for you. They make a living off of controversy, period. It's like playing a game, or playing Monopoly with them, and they're cheaters. They're constantly changing the rules. Every time you think you've got it figured out and everything's going to be good, one lawyer says, oh, did you hear what your ex-wife was saying? Yeah, she called you an asshole. Oh, well, I'm not giving her the car now, and I'm going to fight for the dog. And the lawyer's just going, yes, controversy. They love that shit, all right? So let's get back to equity. If you're trying to revenue, if you're trying to change the venue that you're in and get out of the at-law side where all this legal hoogly-boogly goes on with the manipulation of language and words, it is important to plead the conflict of variance between the rules of equity and the rules of law pertaining to the same subject matter. So, let me give you a light example. I run a stop sign at 3 in the morning. I violated the letter of the law, but I didn't violate the spirit of the law. And because of that, there's a conflict of variance between the rules of law and the rules of equity. Equity says no injured party, no crime, no ticket, no violation. The rules of law, the letter of the law, turns around and says, you violated the letter of the law. The letter of the law is very clear. But what they don't tell you is that if they're not in harmony, it's not binding unless you agree to it. All right? You have to actually physically hurt somebody in order to have broken the law. Okay? So we're going to plead the conflict of variance between the rules of equity and the rules of law, and we're going to change the jurisdiction as such. And in equity, the in chambers, in camera. It's not just in chambers. Everybody running around thinking they know what equity is and how to get in there, and they're like, oh, you just got to get in chambers. Bullshit. It's in chambers, in camera, before an Article 3, Subsection 2, Subpart 1 qualified chancellor. Okay? Know what you're doing. Don't be listening to all these gurus out there running around talking like they've got something figured out. Because I've been at the at-law side in chambers, and it wasn't freaking equity. Okay? They were still practicing the Roman civil law, common law, which takes me back to what I was talking about earlier about common law. Common law is not what 90% of these people out here are spewing. Common law after 1935 is what's common to the judges who administer the trust, administer the bankruptcy. It's the law common to them. It's not the law common to I. All right? So all you guys running into the court going, I want common law. The judge is smiling behind his hands going, you bet your ass you're getting common law. I'm going to serve you a whole shit ton of common law today. You just don't even understand what you're asking for. You're not being very clairvoyant, but come on with it. You want some common law? I got you common law for you. All right? Common law is not what you think it is after 1935. Okay, back to Maxims. The at-law side, okay? The public venue side is privileges, statutes, codes, ordinances, provisions, martial law, okay? Rule by force means my stick's bigger, you better listen, all right? Legal fictions created out of statutes, it's statutory, and it deals with securities, all right? Securities and bonds. That is your common law, at-law side, your public venue. Equity, okay, deals with rights, which is property. Property and rights are synonymous. Grace, love, respect, honesty, integrity, dignity, honor, legal standing before the Father, our Lord and Savior, right? Okay? But by good reason and good conscience and good faith, exclusive equity, which is non-statutory. If you happen to get into chambers, in camera, and you start talking about Title 18, you just walked yourself right back out of it, okay? Because equity doesn't require any of that. It's all about your intent. It's all about your spirit. It's all about conveying the difference between right and wrong, which we are all capable of doing, all right? Equity is also about assets. Equity sees that as done which ought to be done. Equity will not suffer, which means to volunteer. If you ever have a magistrate asking you if you suffered and you say yes, your case will be dismissed. Might not be dismissed today, might be 3 weeks down the road, but he just hoodwinked you. He just broke your claim. Because the fact of the matter is, if you suffered, you volunteered. That's the definition for the word suffer, is to volunteer. My people shall suffer for their lack of knowledge. That's voluntary. Because you can go out and pick up a book tomorrow, and you don't have to suffer anymore. You go pick this book up tomorrow, and you don't have to suffer anymore. It's the original book of trust. It's got all the laws in it, and it is, in fact, a banking manual. This book right here is so badass. Equity delights in equality. One who seeks equity must do equity. Equity aids the vigilant, not those who slumber on their rights. If somebody did you wrong, if somebody caused you harm by way of trespass, you have a duty, a moral obligation to ensure your fellow brothers and sisters in the community don't get hurt by the same jackass not knowing the difference between right and wrong. So you have a moral obligation to bring claim, not file a complaint. Serfs file complaints. Vagrants file complaints. U.S. citizens file complaints. Men make claims, all right? Because if I allow somebody to trespass on your rights, I inadvertently allow them to trespass on mine. And I ain't doing that crap. And none of us should be putting up with it. That's why we're at where we are today in society, is because we're like, well, who cares about Lulu? Who cares about Lulu? Yeah, they run her over. That's just it. We got to start standing up for our brothers and sisters, all right? We got to help to the best that we can with our ability and how learned we are, which is why I do these videos on Facebook. Equity aids, assists the vigilant, not those who slumber on their rights. Equity imputes an intent to fulfill an obligation. That would be in chambers, in camera. Equity acts in personam. Equity arbors a forfeiture. Equity does not require an idle gesture. He who comes into equity must absolutely come with clean hands. That's the clean hands doctrine. Equity delights to do justice and not by way of halves. Equity will take jurisdiction to avoid a multiplicity of suits. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're wanting to get into equity, again, you have to plead the conflict of variance between the rules of equity and the rules at law, and you also need to make it a property dispute. So theft, causing a man harm by theft, by way of trespass, by way of extortion, whatever they extorted you of, whether it was your automobile, your estate's documentation, okay, and what do I mean by estate's documentation? Your driver's license is part of the estate. Your birth certificate is part of the estate. Your social security number is part of the estate. None of that shit belongs to you. It's all part of the estate. You're just the beneficiary of it. And everybody goes, oh, well, if you're receiving benefits, you're underneath their jurisdiction. Hog piss. Okay, check this out. In 1933, when they took everything from you, all right, and they consummated in 1971 by completely removing the gold standard, they left you not a pot to piss in. They become the obligor. Title 18, subsection 8 can't be any more clear. It's for all drafts, all banknotes, all promissory notes. Anything and everything becomes an obligation of the United States. All right? I'm not going to get into that right now, but I'm just trying to help you guys out. Equity follows the law. Now, I don't want you guys to construe this as equity is inferior to contract, because it's not. Contract creates the law and equity follows the law. But equity is superior to the law. You will find many of nations without law. You will find no nations without maxims. You'll find no nations without equity. Okay, because what's right, just, and fair is unanimous across the board throughout the entire world. Doesn't mean bad actors won't lock you up, put you in a cage, put you to death in China for doing the right thing. But I'll tell you right now, I will die doing the right thing any damn day of the week, and I will have no regret for it. I'm never going to waver. I'm never going to come off of doing what is right. Okay? No matter what they threaten you with, stand your ground. 14, equity will not aid the volunteer. Where equities are equal, the law will prevail. Between equal equities, the first in order of time shall prevail. Equity will not complete an imperfect gift. Grantee absolute for lawful consideration. All right, lawful consideration would be gold and silver, or a quid pro quo. You get, I get, and that makes the consideration of a contract. Equity will not allow a statute to be used as a cloak for fraud. That one's so important, guys. When they turn around and say, well, we took your firearm because it was under the seat and concealed, doesn't negate the fact that you took my property without my permission, which is theft. And theft trumps all your statutes, period. So you can bring your complaint about me having an alleged firearm, which is defined by the federal government, which I could care less about their definitions, because the fact of the matter is, it's my property, okay? And theft of my property without just compensation, without my consent, is theft, and it's wrong, and it's unlawful, and it's also illegal, okay? Legal and lawful happen to be in harmony on that, okay? And so the theft of my property without my permission, without my consent, is higher than their statute violation. Are you following me? I'm the victim of that transaction if it transpires in that way. And I'm going to bring my claim while they bring a complaint. And my claim supersedes their complaint, all right? Because they're trying to use a statute as a cloak for fraud, for theft, okay? Equity will not allow a trust to fail for want of a trustee. It's such a beautiful maxim, and it's very, very prevalent on both the public side of statutory trust and also the private side of trust. Equity regards the beneficiary as the true owner, and quasi-maximum here, he who occasioned the loss must bear the burden, all right? Do not, when you're in equity, do not use their codes. That's Roman equity is a privilege. Who owns Roman law and Roman equity? Caesar owns that. And what's it tell us in the good book? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Give it back to him. Quit using his hocus pocus. Quit using his manipulation of language. Live true by thine heart. Do what is right, just, and fair. Okay? So, here are some more maxims. These come out of Plubert's 1880s dictionary. It was published in 1880. It says, common observance, words, terms, phrases, etc., and their construction is not to be departed from. Okay, now, the true maximum is common observance is not to be departed from, but there was some ad lib in here talking about words, terms, phrases, etc., and their construction. Okay, so that would be like the etymology of the words and stuff. When we go back, the older the book, the older the law, the older the rule, normally the more true form that it actually has that benefits you. Okay, and all this stuff was manifested and created to actually benefit you, but they've been perverting it over the last 150 years, and they have, in fact, converted it 180 degrees from the way that it's supposed to be utilized. And if you sit there silently, you acquiesce to it, you allow them to presume and assume that you are what they believe you to be, then you volunteered to go to jail. So, and that's a hard one to hear. 7, Things don't change their ownership when captured by pirates and robbers. Okay, I just explained to you having a technical defense tool underneath the seat. They call it a firearm. That's a federal definition. I don't care what they call it. It's property. And under the Fourth Amendment, I have the right to be secure in my property, person, houses, and effects, absent a warrant, which means if they don't have a warrant, they don't have a crime, they don't have affidavits lined up, they don't have the judge sign off on a true, actual warrant with a hazard bond attached to it, with an affidavit launched to it, they got no business touching my property. Period. It's that simple. Expect from others the same treatment that you expect from others, the same treatment that they receive from you. All right, so be kind to people, right? No injury is done by things long acquiesced in. What do we mean by that? What is this maximum? What is the significance of this maximum? Remember, we're talking about equity does not aid a volunteer, and equity does not aid those who slumber on their rights. Well, that is what this maximum is talking about as well. No injury is done by things long acquiesced in, which means if you were done a wrong and you were caused harm, but you wait for 5 years before you decide you're going to take action against it, equity is not going to aid you on that. Equity is swift because justice is swift. So that's why this preventative maintenance is so good. We don't change the oil once we blow the rods in the motor. We change the oil every 3,000 miles to prevent throwing the rods from the motor, right? From preventing scarring up the cylinder walls and stuff like that, so we can keep our compression high, so we have the benefit of better fuel mileage and longevity of our motor, right? All I'm trying to teach you guys right now in this very setting is preventative maintenance and to help you ascend to the mind. Okay? We must call him absent who is not in the place in which he is sought. Okay? To accept anything as a reward for doing justice is not accepting but extorting. That's a good one. And again, this is a Roman civil maxim, not to be construed with the maxims that I just read to you. An action is not given to him who is not injured. Okay? No injured party. You got the right to face your accuser. You're invoking the Sixth Amendment. Without an injured party, there is no crime. There is no cause of action. All right? And it's a maxim. Now do you see how this woman was able to win her court case using nothing but maxims? Your Honor, an action is not given to him who is not injured. Who's the injured party here today? Well, ma'am, you just don't quite understand what's going on here. Well, I'm sure trying to make a go of it, but again, an action is not given to him who is not injured. Is the prosecutor injured? Well, no, the state is injured. Well, has anybody seen the state, Your Honor? I mean, come on. See where I'm going with this? These maxims they're hard-hitting. An act done without my consent is not my act. Okay? And act itself does not make one guilty unless done with guilty intent. Remember how I keep telling you that intent can never be proven? It must be stated on the record. Okay? Everybody can presume and assume your intent all day long, but until you actually own your shit and say, this is why I did that, that's what lends and proves intent. Right there. Okay? So intent and criminal act itself does not make one guilty unless done with guilty intent. In order rightly to comprehend a thing, inquire first into the names, for a right knowledge of things depends upon their names. Equity remedies errors. Okay? Equity is a kind and perfect reason which interprets and amends the written law, comprehended in no code, but consistent with reason alone. Equity is a kind and perfect reason which interprets and amends the written law, comprehended in no code, but consistent with reason alone. Equity assists ignorance, but not carelessness. Okay? If you're being careless, equity's not coming to save you. But if you were ignorant in doing something, equity aids the legally disabled. All right? So long as your intent was pure. You weren't intending to cause harm, injury, damage, or loss. Equity assists no person to the injury of another. Equity never contradicts the law. Equity does not regard the form and circumstances, but rather the substance of the act. A small debt makes a debtor. A large one makes an enemy. It is one thing to possess, another to be in possession. An ambiguous pleading should be interpreted against the party offering it. Vague and ambiguous, right? Should be interpreted against the party offering it. An argument from a like case avails in law. An argument deduced from an impossibility is of great weight in law. The law permits the taking arms against the armed. All right, these are maxims. An assignee acquires the rights of the assignor. Cease to reign if you do not wish to adjudicate. Consent constitutes law. Consent takes away the heir. The agreement of the parties makes the law of the contract. An incorporated body has no heirs, nor executors, nor can it die. A creditor who permits property to be sold gives up the pledge. That which, when given through mistake, can be recovered back, when given with knowledge of the facts, becomes a gift. It is a fault to meddle with what does not belong to you. Keep your hands to yourself. We learned this shit in kindergarten, guys. If it ain't yours, don't touch it. You can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And as we get older, I don't give a shit what your profession is. If you're a gun-toting moron, the rules are still the same. If it ain't yours, don't touch it. All right, you ain't got nothing nice to say, get back in your cruiser and get your happy ass back down the road. All right, it's that simple. Okay, when we're in equity, and these people are alleging statute, code, city ordinance, rule, and regulation violations, if you don't know who you are, they're going to enforce that on top of you. And that's why I'm doing this video tonight, to help you guys understand you have the power. In the preamble, it was the intent of the testator to maintain the posterity of the people by creating an organization called government, all right? That's what they're charged with. That's their duty. How do we prove that? 63 Charlie, Am Jurisprudence 2D, clearly lays out that all public officials are trustees of the people, all right? So it was the intent of the testators. And where did they get this glorious idea? The Heavenly Father. All right? That's how kicking they were. They were very spiritual people. Time runs against the slothful and those who neglect their rights. Meaning, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any rights. If you try and enforce them 5 years down the road, they're just going to overlook it. Time's elapsed. You can't rub a dog's nose in a puddle of piss 12 hours after they urinated on your carpet. It just doesn't do any good. They don't know what they've done wrong. All right? There may be damage without injury. He who gives and retains testamentary trust gives nothing. All right? Of things which do not appear and things which do not exist, the rule in legal proceedings is the same. Law assists the deceived, not the deceiving. Court or judges' discretion is to know through law what is just. A deceiver deals in Gentiles. Deceit and fraud should always be remedied. I want to find another one before I go. I've got some other studies I need to do today. But there was one in here that I just absolutely was enamored with. Here it is. All men are either free men or they're slaves. All right, that's a maxim, and you can't argue it. You're either free or you're not. Which is it? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, the only way to be a free man is to ascend to the mind and gain acquired knowledge. Because knowledge is, in fact, power. And without that superior knowledge, without doing that preventative maintenance, without putting these people on notice and opportunity of your unalienable rights, and that you will not be volunteering at all to participate in their Ponzi schemes, without doing that, you fall subject and prey to it by default. All right? So anyway, I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks for joining me. Again, I was trying to make this video earlier. I hope this helps you out a lot. And just kind of ascending of the mind and understanding what you could focus on to help you. And these are maxims. Again, you can look online. You'll find Pluberts. That's P-E-L-O-U-B-E-T, published in 1880. And it's Maxims in Law and Equity translated into English. There's a number of books out there that have maxims. I have like 15 or 16 different dictionaries that have 13 to 14,000 maxims a piece in them. And of course, as I go through them day in and day out, I find the ones that I find most beneficial. But then you have to distinguish: are they Roman civil maxims, or are they in the exclusive jurisdiction of equity maxims? Okay, and there's two different types. You'll notice that Roman civil maxims often relate back to banking and securities and things of that nature. So whereas your private exclusive jurisdiction of equity maxims deal with dignity, honor, respect, grace, love, forgiveness, care. And so that's kind of how I identify the difference between what I'm looking at when I'm looking at maxims. If we're talking about banking and things of that nature, it's obviously a Roman civil maximum, which is equitable by characteristic, but not necessarily in the exclusive jurisdiction of equity. Equity by nature, and then there's equitable by characteristic, and you just have to be able to see the difference. And again, common law is not what you guys have been thinking it is. If you're going to do the law common to I, that's one thing. Common law is very rigid. It's not your friend. If you can't come to an agreement in the court, you get to go outside and duel. And whoever comes back was obviously right. Well, we know that isn't true. How's a good, honest man who's, taking care of his farm, and a gunslinger comes into town and kills one of his horses? They can't seem to agree on anything, so the judge says, well, why don't you just go out into the street? And that poor, lonely farmer, who isn't as quick as the gun hand, gets killed, even though he was wrong. Does that make it right? No, it doesn't. So common law was very, very brutal, guys. And that's where man discovered equity. Equity's always been there. It's been there since the beginning of time. You know, you can have equity without law. You will never have law without equity, period. It just doesn't exist. All right. Law fails without equity, but equity flourishes without law. Okay. Because equity is what's right, what's moral, what's conscious, what should be done. So thanks again for joining me. Look forward to seeing you guys soon. I do have a class coming up on discharging debts from credit cards, school loans, mortgages. It absolutely works. We've gotten 3 of them done so far, and we've gotten no resistance at all. 3 letters deep, within 60 days, boom, debt gone. They wash their hands of it. Credit score jumps 30 points. Credit card's gone. It's clean. It's clear. And then, of course, there's some other things that need to be talked about and addressed in class. And again, I'm not hiding anything from you. Start researching the FDCPA, Title 15. You're going to want to look at, in particular, 1692. So you want to jump ahead of class, and you guys want to formulate your good questions while we're in class. Jump ahead to Title 15, 1692. Read through the definitions. Get caught up. And then also start studying the FDCPA. And that way we can have a very educational course coming up here within the next few weeks. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you soon.